this one, right? So that whole first, oh, thank you so much, right? So get into what these are. Then I'll do, and talk about those, right? And then you can hand it off to me for that. And then the last, then the city is going to do the eminent, right? And then next up will be you again, if that's okay, because you have a better hand.
I just want to flip these.
This is fine, because I'll stand up and speak too.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Agendas.
Hi,
Hi.
what do you need?
Copies of the agenda. We made copies of this.
The agenda is in
It's
the
the
first
second
page
page.
of the PowerPoint. That is the agenda.
That is the agenda?
Yes, right here is the agenda.
Okay.
You bet.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming here tonight on this warm summer night, or at least it was warm this morning. So this is the meeting of the School Building Committee, the community meeting. This is for the Lowell High School project. You will note in the handout that is on your desk, there's an agenda on page 1. Without further ado, I will be turning this over to Perkins Eastman and Skanska, but before we do that, perhaps we could have a roll call.
City Manager Eileen Donahue,
Present.
Mayor William Samaras, Councilor Edward Kennedy,
Yeah.
Councilor Rodney Elliott,
Here.
Representative Ratty Mom, School Committee Member Connie Martin, Connor Baldwin,
Here.
Marian Bellotta, Brian Barry, Dave Beatty, Marianne Bustede,
Here.
Christine Clancy, James Cook,
Here.
David Cunningham, Superintendent of Schools Janine Durkin,
Here.
Jay Mason, Maria Sheehy, Diane Trad,
Here.
Billy Joe Turner, Richard Underwood, Mike Fawn.
Thank you. So the purpose of tonight's meeting is to update the School Building Committee on matters that have transpired since our last meeting on August 2nd. As I said, I will turn this over to our consultants to take over.
Hi there, thanks for coming tonight, everyone. So as Eileen said, we're giving you an update, so we're going to talk about the things that we've been doing since the last school building committee meeting on August 2nd. And then we're going to talk to you about some preliminary massing and exterior material studies that we've done. And the city will give a brief eminent domain update. And then finally, we're going to wrap up with the next steps that we're going to do in preparation for the following SBC meeting. So each month, it's going to be that same format. We're going to go over what we've been doing for the month and present it to you and let you know what's coming up. So since the last committee, we've been working on some additional existing conditions investigations. And as we know, some of the older buildings have very little documentation. So the building on the east side of the canal, what we've had done is we had a company go out called Existing Conditions that was a subconsultant to us, and they scanned the entire building with a laser, and they've produced a Revit model for us. And so some of these images that you can see here are the output of that model, and Revit is the program that we use to draw in 3D. And so we now have information for both the exterior and the interior of the building in terms of things that are visible on the surface. So what this model doesn't do is tell us what's inside relative to the structure and things. So those are things that we're still working through. So both the architectural team and our structural consultant, Foley Buell Roberts, also went out into the field with floor plans and elevations and just tried to look at the existing conditions and see how, things that are there are comparing to what we're working on. And then the other things that have occurred is that we've had a few informational meetings with a couple of groups in the city, including Lowell Historic. Planning and Development was there, and this afternoon it was Historic and Planning and Development and National Parks. And so we're getting started getting discussions going with the city about the design and approvals and who we should engage in the conversation. And I just can't really see this from here. So, so Dawn's going to be talking to you about the design and presenting some preliminary massing and materials.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to stand because I'm more comfortable that way. I'm Dawn Guariello. I've met most of you. I think I was on vacation for the last meeting, so if we haven't met, I'm one of the project architects. I work with Alicia and Bob and Joe at Perkins Eastman and have been involved since the beginning of the project. And we have taken a look at some initial massing studies and some exterior material studies. Everyone should know that these are really preliminary. Nothing's been decided. Nothing needs to be decided tonight. They're really just to give you a sense of what the building could look like. It's all very schematic, and we're still working through a lot of details, but it's to give a sense of the scale of the building in the existing site, and to also start to look at exterior materials at the end of schematic design, which is later. We submit in February, but we have to get the cost estimates done basically by the end of the year in December. And we need to establish a budget. So what we want to do is pick from a palette of materials that will allow us some flexibility and a cost that would, as we move into design development and construction documents, to give us some flexibility to then make final decisions and not sort of close ourselves into meeting a certain budget. So this is all just information, options, if anyone feels strongly or if anyone wants to weigh in on something. We look at a lot of different criteria, and I'll speak to some of that. So just for reference, this is the existing site. I think everyone sort of knows where we are tonight. I'm going to focus mostly on the new buildings, so the Freshman Academy and the Gymnasium building. That doesn't mean we're not doing anything to the 1922 building or the 1980 building, but we will, of course, in the 1922 building, there will be historic requirements that we will need to fulfill. And in the 80s building, we're improving a lot of the envelope as far as new windows and maybe some of the base, etc. But I think the goal is to have it be sort of a backdrop for this new construction. So for the sake of tonight, I'm going to focus on the new construction, the Freshman Academy and the Gymnasium, but don't think we're not thinking about that part of the complex as a whole. We're hoping to knit together some of the materials, and I'll speak a little bit to that. This is a aerial view of our 3D of the proposed. So you can see it changes quite a bit, and we're all sort of aware, and if you're not, it's at the end of your packet. There's, for reference, just a site plan and updated floor plans if anyone needs to reference that. But what you're looking at is the 1922 building, the 1980 building, the new 5-story freshman academy, the gymnasium, and the new green space quad that is in between those. When we start to look at massing and materials, we like to look at the surrounding architecture. And in this case, we've looked at a lot of the downtown architecture. There's a lot of history here. There's a lot of beautiful materials, historic materials. So these are all become important as we start to make materials decisions. So referencing the surroundings and the area in which the building will be built is always important to us. So we typically will study some of the surrounding buildings and architecture, and not necessarily mimic it, but feed off of it from a palette standpoint, and, you know, in the case of historic buildings, sort of honoring the history, but not trying to mimic it. The Freshman Academy. So there are some precedents that we feel these images speak to some of what we're trying to do, and in this case, there are some things like some, you know, glassy, vibrant lower floors with traditional stacked classrooms. That's basically what the program has lended itself to. Some cases where we have these kind of, you can reference the plans, but the science rooms in the Freshman Academy can't. And so to highlight that those are something different at the upper floor, some of these sort of speak to how you might architecturally highlight something that's different. A lot of Lowell has mill buildings, brick buildings, punched openings. That's a lot of the architecture that you might typically see in traditional school buildings in Massachusetts. And then little things like overhangs. I mentioned the science rooms can't. So these are all images. If anyone wants to come back to them, talk about why they're here, I can do that. But that's a lot of, like, we look for precedents and we look for ideas to start to form how these buildings may appear. So we presented a lot of this to the working group last week. This was one of the initial views of the Freshman Academy. As shown, this is across the street near the Saugus Arena, and this is Father Morissette and Arcan at that corner where the existing field house is. This is the 5-story Freshman Academy, sort of an active streetscape, and those spaces, for those who don't know, programmatically are different. They're available to everyone we call it the Freshman Academy, but the first floor is very public, and they're business labs and maker spaces and spaces that are open to all students. So it's a different program than what's stacked above it. It's very active and vibrant, so we're looking for ways to celebrate that. One comment that we heard, and then you can see sort of the punched openings and stacked, and then this is the prep science that is stacked on 4 floors above. And what we heard from the working group and what we responded with was this blank wall. And just so you know the history of how we typically design punched openings and classrooms is we like to do north and south facing windows. The north facing light is very controlled, and the south facing is controllable via, light shelves and visors, etc. East and west, it's very harsh light and it's unpredictable because it changes. So we typically do that in our classrooms. And what we heard was that the view from Arcand is a view that a lot of people see and is important to the city and the citizens. And so to have sort of blank walls was not desirable. So in this case, what we did since last week, so folks on the working group are seeing this for the first time, we've included sort of these corner windows and drawing light in, and we talked about in previous projects we've had success sharing a little sliver of interior glazing between 2 classrooms right up against the exterior walls so that you're not disturbed by seeing people in the classroom, but borrowing the light from their windows is a way that we have architecturally brought more daylight into classrooms. So this is our attempt to, sort of liven up that elevation and also wrap the first floor glazing so that the activity that is hopefully happening on that floor will be seen from Arcand. And everyone should know these renderings are intentionally sort of gray and neutral, and nothing's been decided, so this is sketchy, if you will, but that's where we are at schematic design. And so as we move into design development and construction documents, they'll start to be more photorealistic and more realistic based on the materials that are chosen. But at this point, it's very natural to have sketchy images and start to imagine. That's why we show precedent images, start to imagine what they could be. So that's intentional. Yes?
Just want to add a question.
Absolutely.
That we're seeing that shaft-looking thing.
Yep,
Is it
stair, yep. So it won't all be glass, but it's if it's lit up at night, or if it's sort of, the building naturally steps because of the program, and the stair this is a double-loaded corridor, and the stair is right at the end of the corridor, so there will be vertical activity that should be celebrated as a way of livening that facade. There will, yes. Absolutely. Thank you for asking. Yep. The gymnasium. We've talked a lot about this building and how it potentially could be prefabricated, and there are ways to build it quickly. We're still investigating all that. But from a precedent standpoint, it has a very different feel architecturally than the Freshman Academy will. The Freshman Academy we talked about the lower level and the different labs that are happening there, and then the upper level being sort of stacked traditional punched openings and classrooms. The gymnasium, as we actually, a couple of these, we pulled like back when we did the interview for the Lowell High School. And these have always stuck in our mind as a way to have an active gymnasium, something that's visible, yet sort of simple in its material choices. We always like to do a durable base. I'll get into that as we talk about details, but something that's very durable at the ground level, or up to a certain point, and then above it something that's economic yet aesthetically pleasing. And then with these slivers of either views or light that are allowing you to see what's happening at the gym. Also at the end walls, not necessarily glass like this is showing, but maybe cow wall, if anyone's familiar with that, something that's translucent that will allow light to come in, but not direct light that's gonna affect students as they're shooting the basketball, for example. This is a view from sort of looking towards the green space, kind of the inside elevation. This would be the connection from the heart of the school with the entry. This is the corner of the Freshman Academy, and this is the facade that faces Arcan Drive. And what we're doing here is showing that the gymnasium is this, potentially prefabricated or kind of a traditional long span construction. And then the front is a little bit different and has a different feel architecturally. We also want to liven up that elevation. So we heard that at the working group meeting, and have responded with a view sort of from right out across the street here, kind of where the police station, if you came down those steps, looking towards the arena, but then seeing some activity, seeing the gymnasium having this elevation be a little more lively, and then you can see how the punched openings and the end facade of the Freshman Academy has been updated to respond to those comments. You can also see, just for reference, the durable base. In this case, I've shown it at 10 feet. That's something we could talk about, but it's high enough that someone can't reach up and damage. There's I'm sure, a lot of concern about, just general damage, people running into it with backpacks or hitting it. So that would be, we'll get into materials choices, but that's the datum of 10 feet. This would be maybe just vertical metal panel or something, and then potentially this base can come up and be something solid and durable with the views into the gymnasium. And the last view that we chose to show, and I don't show any later, I don't show any materials choices for this, but this is still very much in the works, is the front entry. And it's still being designed, but the idea is that you have the 1980 building, and we're hoping to, whatever the base material is here, sort of improve those planters and the little storefronts that occur through here, update that and tie that material choice into that building, and then also have a glassy, visible, welcoming entry. Does anyone have any questions on any of that? I know it's a lot to absorb. Yes?
You talk about the gymnasium, prefab and what have you, and I think back of going to Boston University, they used to have Quonset huts, and that almost looks something like that. They were temporary buildings that were there for a long time. And I'm looking at, it's almost like you're talking about a temporary structure.
No, it's
And I understand
sorry
you don't
if
mean
there's.
that. I understand you don't mean that, but the looks and the discussion seems to be going to build it as much on the cheap as we can. Is that the?
No, this has to do, a prefabricated building is not temporary. It's manufactured in a way that is a standard set of details. So the structure, the long span structure, I can go back and show you here. This structure is basically stamped out, and it's fabricated in a shop, not erected with a crane, if that makes sense. So it's not like an erector set. So it's more about how it's constructed, not that it's not meant to be there for a long time, if that makes sense. So it's.
I understand, but construction like that I do know of, it's like a shorter period of time than a standard build. I mean, are you telling me that this would be able to be the same as the 22 building or any other?
It will be designed and detailed to be here for 50 plus years, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah.
Yes, so we will not design it in a way that allows them to economically cut things that are important to the durability of it. And truthfully, as we dive into understanding the implications of it, it's possible we're going to go with standard construction and make that work because the limitations may be too much for what we're trying to do. So when I say that it could be that, we've talked about it being that, it's been priced that way, but the reality is it may be too limiting in what we're trying to do with some of the other program around it, with having it be over locker rooms and the height and the roof pit. So
That's my point.
so the limitations may drive us to standard construction, but we're still looking at it.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Yes, here, I can share.
I was just going to add that the material choices with that type of construction as well, it allows for maybe quicker assembly, but as Dawn said, built to last, but the range of options and details that you put into it can get quite custom or premium. Those are the things we can look at. There's a lot more modern construction that's done this way and still has, high quality materials, not cheap materials.
And we can also point to a few examples, if that is in fact the road we go down, to local examples to go and look at if anyone is inclined to do so. So that's still being investigated. Feel free to weigh in. If you feel like that's not something that's desirable, feel free to speak up. It's something we've talked about from trying to fast track the schedule. It's a long enough schedule with, but we're looking at ways to traditional construction measures, have it be the same schedule and without the limitations, if you will.
I understand that, but we're talking about building this, in a sense, a century building. I mean, not that they last a century, but has the potential to be refurbished over a period of years. The thing is, some of the construction like that I've seen, I haven't seen. Maybe I just have seen poorer quality, and that just bothers me at this particular point with the information we have.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else before I move on to materials? Yes.
So I think what the mayor's concerned about is the age of this building compared to if it was traditional construction, and what would be the difference there. So if you're able to discuss that, that would be probably helpful to this committee, as well as the cost difference. Or maybe it's the speed at which the building can be done. Also, too, I mean, the whole thing's not, there's certain parts or components that are prefabricated, right? And then
That's
the
correct.
buildings, okay. So maybe it would be helpful, I think, if you could explain that a little bit more. And also, you referenced that it will kind of depend on the limitations. What exactly do you mean by that?
Yeah, okay, I can speak to the limitations. I may draw from my team to help answer the rest because there are certainly people that are more qualified in the type of construction and cost of it that I don't want to misspeak. But as far as the limitations, sometimes it has to do with, Bob alluded to it, some materials choices, which I think can be overcome. Sometimes it's height. Frankly, they can't, with this being a locker room, multi-purpose space on the lower level, and then the height of the gymnasium plus the clearance needed for volleyball is really the determining factor. And then you start getting into heights that possibly are gonna, we need to talk to multiple companies that do this, and they all, as you can imagine, have their own criteria for heights. But when I say limitations, that's what I'm talking about, sort of how do we want a pitched roof? Does it have to be a flat roof? There are things that certain vendors only offer certain ways, so we want to understand what our options are before we can dismiss or agree to it.
Okay, and you don't know that right now?
Well, we're still investigating. We've
Yeah.
met with a couple, and we
Great.
have a couple more.
Okay.
So
Yep.
I think it's premature to speak to it, but those are some of the things that we're looking at as we speak to the vendors. And then, Joe, do you want to speak to cost and duration of construction?
This decision to consider this was made early on, and we're in the process now of getting into that detail. And I think the concerns that have been expressed here today are certainly the concerns we have had as well. I think when you see a lot of these long span buildings, you see them oftentimes in warehouse applications, right, with a corrugated siding, and that's what comes to mind. So those types of images are the ones we're most familiar with. The reason for some of these precedent images that Don put together was to show how you could do this and not have it look like that. So what we're trying to do is find out if this system is appropriate for this application. We recognize we have a budget to meet, and we want to be able to meet that budget. So this was one idea that we looked at early to try to maintain the budget. So we'll continue to look at that through different manufacturers and find out what their limitations are. And in the end, we may find that there are certain things about this that are very strong. Maybe it's just the structure, and everything else would be a normal type of construction. And, we'll see if that makes sense to do.
Okay, and I've seen warehouse buildings in industrial parks where you can play football or baseball inside the building, that they're that big, and I think that's kind of what you're going for in terms of the span. But just to go back to what the mayor was getting at, what about I think his question had to do with the life of a building like that compared to a more traditional building, and the cost. What would be the cost difference if you have an idea of that now? Even if it's just an estimate, I don't think anybody's going to hold you to it at the next meeting, but whatever you can give us.
I don't want to take a guess at the cost, but what I can, what I can tell you is that when we were thinking about this, we were thinking about some sort of hybrid. We were thinking of something that would last 50 years and take the benefits of a prefabricated building. We weren't necessarily thinking of a straight prefabricated building. So what we're doing now is testing those ideas to see if they can actually be executed.
Thank you.
Maybe it's worthwhile to suggest, and we have a lot to do before the schematic design, but deliverable is due, but this decision will need to be made, so we may want to just give you an update at a future meeting based on our findings and let you know what our feeling is, and you can tell us what you think, and then we can collectively make a decision, if that makes sense. It doesn't have to be a long, drawn-out presentation, but just share with you our findings and what some of the limitations are, and does it make sense, and what do we, as a group, feel the best decision to make is. So I'm happy to ask Alicia to add that to a future meeting.
We have a careful schedule of the meetings that are coming up, and the next SBC is going to include some building systems as part of the discussion. So by that time, we will have gotten some information back from some of these vendors, and we've also have gone back to other consultants on the team and talk about, is this system the right way? One of the people we'll be speaking to is the structural engineer, who has done many, many schools and done many pre-manufactured buildings. So we will be coming back to you with some more information, and I believe it'll be the next meeting. If we don't have enough information by then, it might slide a bit, but that's our plan, is to give you information so you can make an informed decision.
Thank you.
And I'm glad she mentioned building systems, because as we met collectively as a team with all of our consultants, that was a concern of the mechanical and electrical, you know, some of the possible limitations of these types of buildings. I know our structural engineer has worked on them. And there are a few gymnasiums locally, I know one in Rhode Island and one, I think, in Chelsea, that have done this in a school setting. So just for reference. So again, like if you're interested in seeing something that's built product and knowing what we could certainly send a photo or send you to there to walk it and get a feel for how durable and how well constructed it is. Did you have a question?
You know, it may be a little preliminary tonight to talk about cost, but if we're going to evaluate a long-span prefab structure, which those examples are pretty elegant in my opinion, but you know, if we're going to envision something like that, which does have potential for cost savings, then we want to understand what those potentials might be and see how they might apply. Maybe we can do a really elegant building in the long-span prefab component system, and put more money into some of the other more substantial, more traditional building systems. It may be an option that we definitely want to evaluate, but we should look at the numbers, I think.
Sure. Okay. Any other questions before I get into materials? And again, these are just palettes of materials that we think are applicable to the local architecture and materials we've used in the past and are comfortable with. That doesn't mean that these are our only options, but options that we feel strongly showing as good examples of what public schools in Massachusetts, you know, the palette of materials could be. This is all exterior, by the way. So I went through these. So the first thing we typically look at is a durable base. We do this on all our public schools. Everything, you know, and the height varies. It can be as low as 2'8", it could be as high as 10 feet, and it doesn't have to be the same everywhere, but acknowledging that we live in New England, there are snow, you know, there are snowplows and shovels and you know, elements throughout the 4 seasons in which we get all of the beauty of, but also our buildings can take a beating from. And so we typically will do a durable base, and some of the ones that we've used are brick veneers, stone veneer, and some sort of stone, whether it's true stone or simulated stone. Some of the thought behind that is acknowledging sort of the history of the 1922 building and the beautiful base that is over there, and would it be possible to, maybe not everywhere, but somewhat, you know, use that as a sort of nod to the history of that building. So these are all materials we've used before. Going through some examples, when we showed this to the working group, we were asked to show examples of where, you know, some projects that have used these materials. This is Martin Luther King School in Cambridge. You'll see this a few times because there's a nice palette of materials, but you can see the base, the brick base, and in that case it's red. It doesn't have to be red, it could be gray, to sort of, you know, acknowledge all the stone that's locally here, but maybe not, doesn't have to be red. Stone. This is Mount Greylock Regional. This is actually out in Western Mass in Williamstown. Here, it's hard to see, so you may have to zoom in a bit, but this is a place where we dropped it because they have quite a bit of landscape around, and the stone's only at 2'8", which was the windowsill height. And that was our way of balancing budget, but also still providing the durable base. And then this is a school that is in Washington, D.C., Dunbar High School, and an example of a simulated stone that was used there. Facade materials. So I'm talking, in this case, about materials that might be higher than the durable base. So you can imagine a few different options on the base that could be used, but then what's happening above it? In a lot of cases, you might see a traditional brick. We see that a lot in Massachusetts. We've also used phenolic panel. I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with this. By the way, we have samples of everything. If anyone wants to touch, feel, come up after, I can send these around if anyone's interested. But phenolic, both the wood and the beige are phenolic, and these are phenolic's very, very durable and is used as a rain screen, meaning it's got an open joint system, doesn't need maintenance, and the water gets behind it and then is designed in a way that it gets out. So it's basically airflow around this, so this serves as simply a facade, and we've used it in a few cases. I'll send these around, because these are the big ones you may want to come up and look at after. If it's not straightforward or you're not clear on what they are, you can just ask. So there's brick. The phenolic comes in wood grain materials, or also a solid. There's the traditional insulated metal panel. That's the biggest one that I sent around. That's like an alucobond, if anyone's familiar with that. High-density fiber cement. That's a lot like the phenolic, only a different composition. And that's also a rain screen. And then corrugated metal. And in that case, I'm thinking more for the gymnasium, not so much the freshman academy. Yes? It's like 45 to 65. Tell me if I'm speaking out of line as far as cost per square foot. So brick is closer to the 45 range, and some of the phenolic, the rain screens and such, are somewhere in the 65. So again, that's why I preface this by saying there's no decisions that need to be made. We just need to acknowledge the sort of range that we want to work within and understand that there are multiple options. So yes, thank you, Diane, for pointing that out. This is an example of a phenolic wood grain. This is Essex Tech. It's up in Danvers, Hathorne actually, part of Danvers. And you can see that the durable base here was actually a CMU, which I guess is also an option here. You've got some of that in your existing building, which maybe you love, maybe you don't. And then the wood rain screen, the phenolic above. These are solid, so again, the composition's the same. It's the veneer on the outside that is different. In some cases, this is a solid. You can see it vertically in panels and horizontally in planks. In that case, of course, brick, everyone knows what it is, but showed a couple examples. We've done it at Mount Greylock. Do you have a question? Yeah? Sure.
Maybe it might be helpful to talk about, you know, you could have something that's high-tech and glass versus more traditional, or get a sense of what this group might be looking for.
As far as the... Sure. Yeah, I think what Marianne is suggesting is that, you know, a lot of schools in Massachusetts and elsewhere are, you know, sort of traditional brick. Maybe they were built in the 50s, 60s, 70s. A lot of them are, you know, lower. We have a taller school than you might typically see with the 5 stories. And understanding if it wants to sort of look in the range of not historic, but honoring the history or honoring the mill, sort of a traditional brick with punched openings, or does it want to be something that's kind of newer and just, you know, not trying to be historic, but really be modern, or, for lack of a better word, something that's like, you know, for the time in which it's built. So is that what you're getting at, is sort of understanding the language in which we want the building to feel, so that then we can make decisions about the materials. So as it relates to glassy and versus solid, we typically try to keep to like a 24% of our exterior wall for sustainable reasons. Like you want a certain amount of light in all the learning spaces, and we want it controlled, and we want to bring it in high, and we'll get into some of that as we look at interior, but we often will pitch ceilings and draw the light in high, have light shelves, and really have the learning spaces be bright without glare. So in the classrooms, you're going to have a more traditional punched opening. And I think in the case of the massing anyway, I showed sort of solid and void, and what I think maybe wants to look different from a glassy standpoint, or, you know, an activating facade versus something that's more solid. So are you looking for people to weigh in on it, or just plant the seed for? Plant the seed. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so, yes.
I just had a question along that line. So, I, for one, there are 4 different structures,
Yeah.
two on the, obviously new, 1980, 1922. I'm wondering if, obviously, looking at the materials in person is helpful, but also looking at this, if we can have some sketches of, on both ends,
Yep.
something that was traditional and how they blend with the 4 buildings, or something more contemporary.
Sure.
I would like to see something that shows that configuration
Okay.
at some point,
We're
whatever
gonna,
point.
I'm going to, later in the presentation, show some materials put onto the massing that I had done. If that doesn't satisfy what you're looking for, let's talk,
Okay.
and we'll, for
Yep.
the next meeting, do updates to show that. Okay. This is again, the Martin Luther King School. This is the high-density fiber cement, which a sample is going around. It's just a different composition, but again, a rain screen with jointing that doesn't need so much maintenance. It's just open air joints. And then lastly, the corrugated metal. This is not local, but it gives the feel of what I'm imagining the gymnasium might have, with sort of the glassy openings and then the corrugated metal. That's an economic material choice. That Essex project that I showed, the front was wood phenolic. The back is actually corrugated metal. As you round the back and it gets taller, it drops off. So that's a place where you could see both of those materials if you wanted to drive by. And then Martin Luther King has it in a horizontal. There's a lot of different cross sections and directions in which this material can go. So these are just some visuals that start to demonstrate what these materials could look like. That doesn't mean that I've made any choices. I haven't. I'm just showing you a bunch of different options with the durable base. So always what's on the bottom is what's being shown. So in this case, it's the gray brick, and then up top with the red. And you might start to imagine what's solid, what's void, what's durable material at the base, and then what's above. And then for the sake of this, I haven't shown it as brick. That would likely be a metal, like an Aluka bond or a metal panel, something different to make that, that science bay something special. In this case, the same brick up top, but with the stone below. It's subtle here, but you can see a little bit of difference. This is the wood grain rain screen with the brick below. Doesn't look a whole lot different than the brick in color, but it would have quite a different feel as far as the jointing and the panel sizes. You can do a lot with panel sizes. In that Essex project, we have big panels with joints that actually break it down, so you can do a lot with the panels themselves. And then this is the phenolic, again with the wood and the stone as the base. And then lastly, I've got the fiber cement on the upper piece. You could also imagine a yellow brick. I don't know, the 1922 building has yellow. There are a lot of different ways to imagine this building. So we're just trying to show options and range without, necessarily making any final decisions. And then also the fiber cement with the stone. At the gym, the corrugated up top, and it's hard to see, I apologize for this angle, but that would basically be anywhere that there are not windows, and then the brick below, and in this case, that front piece that faces Arcand, I showed you the other view that has more glass, but you can imagine a nice solid with maybe a school name or some sort of acknowledgement about where you are when you're on Arcand, and then have a glassy view into the very active gymnasium. And then the stone, same thing, it would be that durable base and then carry up for the entirety of that Arcand elevation. Any questions? Yes.
I think, after looking at this, it's going to be very important for us to get several pieces of information. One, the cost of the material, but the durability of that material, because, okay, I can understand that what you're saying is 10 feet of the base of the building, you want to ensure that whether it's hit with snow or students leaning against the building, it's truly durable. but I think we have to know about the durability of the material on the top part of the building. Because I have this, this crazy thought that say 70 years from now, that they're gonna think of rebuilding the high school in the downtown, the 22 building will still be what they're gonna operate around, and everything else will be taken down. I mean, but the thing is, I understand costs, but I think if we're gonna make a good decision, it's costs, but durability of some of this material.
Right.
Some of the thinness of the material, I just don't see it even surviving just basic weather.
Yeah, so
Concern.
the stone will obviously be more, or a simulated stone is likely. Have you costed out a simulated stone? It's been a few years since I have. It's more than brick? 45, yeah.
I think a simulated stone, depending on what product you use, is a little bit more, is more like 50, 55.
Yeah, so it's still within that 45 to 65. The rain screens are closer to the 65 range. So everything we're sort of showing you here, with the exception of like true granite, will be in that 45 to 65-ish range. And that's where we're trying to aim. Do we want to be on the high side of that or low side of that? We just want to make a decision about the approximate range in which we're pricing for schematic design. We need to show something, and then know that there's, we've allowed ourselves a budget number to adjust a little if we need to in design development or construction documents as the design moves along.
But the material that you showed us, some will definitely last a lot longer than others. I mean, and we just have to know that as.
Yeah,
as
so
we can.
brick is fairly obvious. Look at your 1980 building. It's all about the envelope in which it's built on. So in that case, what's behind it is starting to fail and let water in, and that's why the bricks are not, the bricks themselves are fine. It's the wall in which it's built
Correct,
on.
Yeah. That's what happened to our gymnasium also.
Yeah, so, that's an unfortunate, it's not the brick's fault in that case. So brick is very durable. Stone, obviously, real stone's super durable. The wall panels, I've seen some as old as 50, we were talking about this in the working group, actually. Europe has been using phenolic panels, I'm gonna guess, over 20 years, longer, does anyone know? And the fiber cement. Both those materials are they originated in Europe, and they've been using them forever and a day, it feels like, over there, and only recently, I'd say in the last 10 or 15 years, using them in the States. There are, and we talked about this again at the working group for anyone that was there, I'm sorry I'm repeating myself, but it's a great question. They keep changing and improving the composition, and a lot of it's in the veneer. So if ever you've been to the Boston Children's Museum, it has that wood looking, it's a lighter wood, it's more like a birch, and it's delaminating, and that's the old engineering of that panel. We are assured by all the representatives that represent these products that the improved ones are better. How long they've been around, that was a question that came up at the working group, and we promised, not for today, but that we'd follow up with some answers about how long, tell us about some buildings that have been around longer than, like the Essex one's 3 or 4 years old, so that's not a good indicator of the life of it, but it's a good indicator of what the current technology is for those panels. The inside of the panels has been around forever. Phenolic is like a material, we often use it on dividers and compartments and things that are like, that kids can literally try to scrape into, and it's virtually indestructible. So the core of it, that technology has been around a long time and is very durable, and it's what you put on the face of it, whether it's the wood or the solid, that how they laminate that is what they continue to improve on, and will really be what gives you the life of it. Because once it starts delaminating, it could look terrible, but and check out the Boston Children's Museum. I went and looked at that when we were doing Essex. I went down there and I called the rep and was like, this looks terrible, I'm not using your product. And he's like, no, we've changed it, And they have examples of places that they've used it and it's withstanding the elements. And the metal, it's all about how thick and we know, designing public schools in Massachusetts, that you can't specify a super thin metal facade. It's just not gonna fly. Like, again, we have kids who throw things and, ice off the roofs. Like, there are elements that we can't control that we just need to, and we know enough to specify a proper gauge. And some of it's quite thick, and as long as it's specified that way, which is what we typically do, it can withstand quite a bit of abuse, if you will. Anything else? Yes.
Just for myself, I don't like the corrugated metal
Okay.
at all. I think it looks good for maybe the first 20 years, the first half of the life, but then it starts to look tired.
Yeah.
I think during the second half. And so I'm assuming that part of the reason why you would go with that is because you're looking at maybe going prefab on that building.
Maybe. So it could also be, you can also do like a brick facade on the prefab. I don't think one is necessarily gonna, if we do a hybrid that Joe was talking about, I think if you're looking for like an all brick or a stone then brick, something that's like more traditional, durable, I think that's something that can be accomplished. So we're not sold on the,
No.
I don't want you to think that that's what I think it needs to be. I'm just presenting that as an option.
So, but maybe at a subsequent meeting, we could get the price difference between those. It would really have to be, that'd have to be, to me, have to be a very compelling economical reason to go with corrugated metal.
There is a price difference, although lately it's been coming up. We just used it on that Mount Greylock one, like they're literally starting school on Monday, so it's just been constructed. And I can get that pricing. But here's the carpenters, it's a long story, but the carpenters install it, so the price changes, and so there's a lot that goes into pricing in public buildings in Massachusetts, and that starts to play a role. So we can get those numbers for you. Yeah. Anything else? No? Oh, you have a microphone.
Thank you. Thank you for that presentation. Next on the agenda is an update on the eminent domain process since our last meeting. I can tell you that we have been progressing through the eminent domain process as required in terms of going through appraisal and relocation experts. We will very soon be concluding that and giving proper notice under the statute to the owners. And on the schedule, we're on track and on time, and Elliot is here, who's been working on the process. And we would expect the next step for the city council in terms of the eminent domain process would be a vote on the notice of taking, and that would likely happen sometime. It could have been, I think we're banking on early October at this point. Again, well in advance of the schedule that was anticipated, and that we want to have that process concluded prior to going to the MSBA next April. And we will update the school building committee at our next meeting with any information and materials that have been generated for the next school building committee. And so I guess I don't know if there's any questions. The next steps and for the preparation, I don't know whether you folks want to address the next steps, but they're in our agenda.
There we go. Yeah, so the next steps, we have a lot of meetings lined up. The next meeting that we have is on the 11th of September. We're going to have a sustainable priorities meeting. So we're going to regroup in terms of what we've been talking about. And now that we have a single project that we're working on instead of multiple options in play, as a group, we're going to decide what our priorities are that will inform our design going forward. And then on the 18th and the 20th, it's what's called focus groups. And these are all-day meetings that we have with the various departments at the high school. And we sit and we talk about, the details of each of the spaces. And then following that, we have our next cycle on the 25th. We have our next cycle of a working group meeting that we will present some updates from what we talked about today, and also start to talk about some building systems and interior materials. And then on the 3rd, it's a busy month. On the 3rd of October, we have a student forum. So there's going to be, it's a half-day that day, it's early dismissal, and we're going to meet with the students and engage them and the faculty to get people excited about the project and let them know what's going on. And then on the 4th, we're back with you guys again.
Okay, any questions about the next step, what's happening over the next month? I had one question, and you've mentioned that at some point, obviously, you'll want input from this committee in terms of direction, whether it's materials and particularly on the gymnasium, the process, and you'll be providing us with update. But my question is, in the calendar, by what date do you expect you'll want that information? Just so we know. I know you mentioned this has to be determined at least by year's end, is that right?
That's when our drawings are due, so ahead of that.
Yeah, so we'll be probably looking at targeting probably November meeting that we're going to be honing in on some of those decisions. So what we have to remember is that this is a process that's iterative. So we have to look at things from the macro level to the micro level. And we have all these little pieces chugging along, and then we have to get each piece to a certain point. And around that November point, we're going to then be getting input from you, and then we're going to be starting, there'll be our pricing package in December, and we'll, start getting those documents together, and then we have 2 months really to look at pricing, have time to discuss and reconcile. So it's
Okay.
really 2 times.
I just think it's good for the committee, this committee to know when, decisions will be, start being made in terms of this. And so if there is information as far as if anybody wants to make a site visit or those kinds of things, because it's not that far off, I guess. So thank you. Is there any other business? First, let me look to our consultants. Anything else that you wanted to bring up? Any members of the school building committee have anything else? David.
Just quick, at one of the meetings, you had talked about using one of the back walls along the canal as a movie theater, possibly. I wonder if we're working with some of the different groups in the city about setting up a movie theater, using Lucy Larkham Parkway more. Because if we're going to use that more as a nighttime venue, you might want to plan something into whether it's extra electrical outlets on the outside of the building so that carts could set up and you could have fairs there, popcorn machine, anything that you'd wanted to have. Is there, I know Sunset was 7-Eleven tonight. You could have a movie over there at night on the side and using. And I imagine that would be done by, local groups, whoever, whether it's the National Park Service or whatever. Are you working with anyone on things like that, or? Yes. Okay.
So, excuse me. One of the things that we're trying to do, these are all early ideas, and we're just trying to make sure that as we build any component of this building, that the entire campus building can become a teaching tool of sorts or an asset. So we're not even going as far as to saying that, you can have movies on the canal. We don't know if you can. We're trying to create opportunities for performance venues. If we know we keep the materials the right color, you get, by default, a natural movie screen. So those are the types of things. We've only just started the idea, so as we get further, it'll be part of our discussions going forward with faculty, with the working group, and of course with other business and regulatory groups.
We talked about it today.
Yeah, I was just gonna say.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
So we met today with National Park Service. Diane was there. Historic. Who else? Diane, Claire, and there were. Yep. So there were quite a few discussions about not only the canal side and that plaza we're sort of creating outside of the cafeteria, but also the green, the quad, whatever you want to call it. They really are interested in using that as a venue, both for, we understand that right outside the Masonic building that they do performances and bands come, et cetera. We said, wouldn't it be nice if you did that just, half a block up on the plaza that we create? And, not only great for the students, think like, cheerleading or dance groups or performances, but also the community in ways that we can start to imagine but aren't fully there yet. So those conversations happened some today, and I know that it seemed like the people we met with were all really excited about all of those opportunities. So, and also the auditorium, frankly. So we talked about all of that, and there'll be more discussions. So
No, I just thought, you might want to plan.
Yes.
Electrical outlets or something like that.
Yep,
outside
and we will,
For
absolutely.
projectors, for, different things that are happening.
Great, thank you for that.
Thank you. Councilor Kennedy.
Thank you. That seems like a really good idea, and more than just movies, for other types of performances, and maybe something that both the high school could use and the community as well. So, for instance, over on the North Common, we have a little amphitheater that's right in there, something like that, where you can have small performances, and it could be used even in the summertime by other groups. I think that's kind of what you're talking about. It would be good if we could, if you could explore that a lot more. I think that'd be pretty nice.
Is it the folk festival? Yeah, that came up with, so there are a few different ideas that are already
Yeah.
seeds that are being planted for ways to use that. So if anyone has additional ideas, we're open to them.
And you're aware that we light the canal up now, right? Yeah, okay.
And we've seen it actually.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Jay Mason.
Just a quick question. It was nice talking about materials tonight, getting a sense of the visual of what we're going to have and how compatible and uniform it will be relative to each component, how that gets worked out. I'm excited to see how that works out. I think, as the manager suggested, seeing a full view of, like that aerial perspective that you've done, and how the different grids and proportions and lines of texture come together and show the different buildings together in your different offerings might be really helpful. But the thing I wanted to ask about was a similar exploration about energy systems, hugely expensive part of what we're going to be doing. I don't know if we're planning on looking at that in an upcoming meeting. Obviously, we don't have a whole lot of time, and we're making those decisions now. So I'm just interested to know what your thoughts were on moving forward with energy systems selections.
So at our meeting on Tuesday, this will be touched upon, our sustainability meeting, but in addition to that building systems meeting, we will be exploring that. So just like everything else, we're going to be, for the schematic design, we're taking a snapshot and we're going to determine a budget, but we all have to remember that everything we're doing is never, it's certainly not final, and we're securing something in the budget, so we have something that we will work to develop. But I just don't want anyone thinking, like even the elevations, we're talking about getting a 3D view. It's not like this is the exact design and we don't develop it. So it's definitely a work in progress, and we're going to explore these options, including the energy systems. Yeah, on the 25th is the working group.
Jim Cook.
I just want to comment and thank you, Eileen, for including the Planning and Development Office in this process. I thought this should have been included over a year ago. And I think, you got a very talented staff, and I'm glad to hear that you're all working with them. I think they bring a lot to this process and can help. So thank you for bringing them in.
Thank you. Anything else? Oh, Councillor Elliott.
We're just getting questions now. Will all the classrooms be air conditioned? Okay, thank you.
That is a question that gets asked quite a lot, especially this summer. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Well, thank you. Thank you all. As you can see, it's going to be a busy fall between now and the end of the year, certainly in this project. And I thank everybody for coming and participating. One of the reasons I asked about when decisions are going to have to be made, that's going to be very important for this committee when we need a quorum and we need to take votes. And so we will try and give as much advance notice to the committee when we know important votes are coming on, so we can make certain we're not missing a meeting for lack of quorum. So we'll be sending out communication on that. And unless there's anything else, I'll entertain a motion
Move to adjourn.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
All in favor? Thank you very much. We stand adjourned.